The president has declared victory on affordability in America. He says prices are under control, the economy is strong, and everyday Americans are winning. But out in the real world, something very different is happening. Across the country, companies both big and small are quietly warning their customers that prices are going up, and not by a little. Iconic brands like Levi's denim and Columbia sportswear are raising prices on their clothing lines. McCormick, the spice maker, has publicly said tariff-related costs are adding millions to its expenses, and it's passing some of that along to shoppers. Smaller firms with thinner profit margins are planning price hikes too, often in the 4% to 10% range on everything from apparel to appliances. Economists tracking online prices say recent monthly web price increases are the largest in more than a decade. Corporate leaders blame a mix of higher wages, rising healthcare costs, and most of all, the impact of tariffs on imported goods. Some companies raised prices earlier due to tariffs, held off for a holiday pricing lull, and now are back on the increase. One business owner told analysts he simply can't absorb costs that include steel, health insurance, and wage pressures without asking customers to pay more. Yet at the same time, wage growth tells a starkly different story. The latest U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Employment Cost Index shows private sector wages rising at just over 3% in the fourth quarter of last year, the smallest gain in more than 5 years and barely ahead of inflation. That means most workers aren't seeing real increases in their take-home pay that outpace rising prices. For many lower-income workers, real wage growth has slowed so much that, in some cases, it's effectively disappeared. In earlier years, those at the lower end of the income scale tended to see stronger real wage gains, but right now, they're the ones with the least movement upward. So while political leaders talk about victory on affordability, families and small business owners are feeling something very different. Sticker shock at the checkout and bills that climb faster than their income. A key factor underlying these price rises is the tariff policy pursued by the administration. Let's take a look at how these import taxes have changed and who's really paying for them. Experts who study trade policy point to an enormous shift. Just a few years ago, the effective U.S. tariff rate, that is, the average duty on imported goods, was around 2.5%. Today, because of wide-ranging tariffs on dozens of countries and key products, that rate has ballooned toward the highest levels seen in nearly a century. Natasha Cern, a former Treasury official and now a law professor, puts it bluntly: tariffs act like a tax on American consumers. The government collects the duty at the border, but someone has to pay for it further down the supply chain, and those added costs don't magically disappear. Unfortunately, small businesses often can't absorb these costs the way a large multinational might. Many have simply shut down or raised prices to stay afloat. Your average mom-and-pop importer doesn't have the luxury of spreading billions in increased costs across a global enterprise. When tariffs go up, those costs come out of the bottom line or get passed straight to customers. Financial Times commentator Brendan Greeley captures another consequence of this environment. Once businesses have to raise prices to keep their books balanced, consumer purchasing power erodes. And that has a ripple effect on the broader economy. The uncertain future of tariff policy, with new rounds announced, paused, and then reimposed, makes long-term planning difficult for manufacturers and retailers alike. Greeley says the current situation shows the tariffs are being used as a negotiating tool in global trade talks, not as a straightforward strategy to boost domestic manufacturing. Data supports these concerns. New research shows that nearly 90% of the cost of the 2025 tariff increases fell on U.S. consumers and American businesses, not foreign exporters. That's despite official statements claiming that the cost would be borne overseas. According to a study by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and other analyses, while some burden has slowly shifted toward foreign producers over time, the overwhelming share still lands here at home. In practical terms, that meant about $1,000 in added tariff costs per household last year and an estimated $1,300 this year. The largest tax increase for many families in decades. And that's just direct tariff cost. When you factor in how companies are responding to those tariffs, for example, by raising the price of goods or services to maintain margins, the effect on household budgets and overall price levels becomes even more pronounced. Now overlay this with what's happening on wages. As prices rise, wage growth slows. At the lower end of the wage scale, workers now see the least growth, even though these are the same households that spend a larger share of their income on basics like food, clothing, and transportation. Combine these factors and you have affordability pressures that undercut broad economic narratives of prosperity. But there's more to this story than tariffs and wages. Actions by the president's own family business have injected another layer of controversy into the national conversation. This past week, the Trump family's private company, the Trump Organization, filed federal trademark applications seeking exclusive rights to use the president's name at airports and on a wide array of related products and services. These filings cover names like President Donald J. Trump International Airport and extend to buses, umbrellas, luggage, and flight uniforms found at airports. The organization says these applications are designed to protect against misuse of the trademark, not to collect fees, especially in connection with a proposal to rename a Florida airport near the president's Mar-a-Lago club. But critics have raised questions nonetheless. If local governments or states rename airports after the president, will commercial licensing or other financial arrangements follow? Trademark lawyer Josh Durbin, who first flagged the filings, described them as unprecedented. Historically, landmarks and major public infrastructure named after presidents occur years, or in many cases decades, after they leave office. Presidents like Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, and Gerald Ford waited long after their administrations to have such honors. Even in death, becoming the namesake of an airport is a slow process. Yet here, filings are being made while the current president is still in office, through a private business that remains tied to his family's financial holdings. This isn't the first time that the Trump family's business dealings have intersected with public office in ways that raise eyebrows. Historically, the Trump name has been licensed or monetized on real estate developments, products, and branding ventures around the world. And investments connected to members of the Trump family have at times overlapped with political and policy arenas, bringing up ongoing concerns about conflicts of interest, ethics, and the appearance of public office being used to facilitate private gain. For example, the Trump family's investment in an Israeli drone manufacturer, a deal valued at about $1.5 billion, occurred while the president was overseeing the U.S. Department of Defense, raising questions about whether policy decisions could intersect with private investments. Critics argue that when members of a president's family invest in sectors like defense, finance, or lightly regulated markets like cryptocurrency, the potential for conflicted incentives becomes more than just theoretical. It becomes a topic of public concern. The newest chapter in that story is a high-profile crypto forum that the Trump family hosted at Mar-a-Lago with executives from major financial entities like Goldman Sachs and Nasdaq. Cryptocurrency markets are known for being far less regulated than traditional finance. Being an early entrant into these lightly regulated markets can give participants an advantage, especially if they maintain influence with policymakers who could shape future regulation. That's not simply about crypto. It's about how emerging financial systems intersect with political power and who benefits when the regulatory environment is still taking shape. So to pull all of this together, what are we hearing from everyday reality versus political messaging? On one hand, there are repeated claims that tariffs will make America prosperous and that affordability is improving. Yet companies are raising prices, households are paying more in tariff-related costs, and wage growth is sluggish. Workers at the bottom end of the economic ladder, the very people often cited as beneficiaries of economic policy, are seeing the least gain. On another front, family business ventures, whether trademarks on airports, investments in defense and tech, or leadership in financial sectors like crypto, continue to fuel questions about ethics and accountability. At the same time, the headline story of a strong economy must contend with economic uncertainty. For many Americans, especially lower-income workers and small business owners, the lived experience is not one of broad-based prosperity. It's one of rising costs outpacing wage growth, price hikes squeezing family budgets, and economic promises colliding with complex market forces on tariffs and trade. In short, the narrative of victory on affordability faces a hard test when compared with the economic data and real trends in business, household budgets, and wage growth. And as long as these gaps persist, the story of economic progress will be incomplete, without addressing the real pressures felt by families, workers, and small businesses across the country.